All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really challenging idea, one that comes from a pretty controversial source. The question is, what if the story we've all been told about one of history's biggest villains isn't quite the whole story? So these were supposedly the final words of Adolf Hitler. It's a pretty defiant statement, right? Especially for someone we see as the absolute embodiment of evil. But the source material we're digging into today suggests that this image we all have, well, it might deserve a closer look. And that really gets to the core question the source is asking. Was Hitler some kind of singular, uniquely evil force, or was he the product of a broken, chaotic system? To get to the source's answer, we kind of have to deconstruct the narrative that we all know so well. According to the source, our whole understanding of Hitler as the ultimate bad guy really rests on three main ideas, three pillars. And it argues that if we want to see the bigger picture, we have to take a hard look at each one. You know, when you hear the name Hitler, these are the three things that probably pop into your head, right? Orchestrating the Holocaust, starting World War II all by himself, and basically being the face of modern antisemitism. This is the foundation of his villainous reputation. But is that the whole story? The source material we're exploring really challenges us to look closer, to question each of these pillars. So let's start with the first one. Okay, so first up, mass killing. Now, the source approaches this not by denying the horror, not at all. What it does do is place it in the much broader and frankly brutal context of the 20th century. The number that's just seared into our minds is the roughly 6 million Jewish people who were murdered in the Holocaust. It's an unimaginable horror. The source doesn't dispute that. Instead, it asks us to zoom out and look at the whole era. And when you do that, the source points out something pretty startling. Other leaders in the 20th century were responsible for death tolls that were comparable, or in some cases, way, way higher. Mao's policies, Stalin's purges and famines, we're talking about tens of millions of deaths. So why the intense, singular focus on Hitler? Well, the source offers a provocative answer. It basically came down to branding. Hitler was shockingly open about his hateful ideology. Other leaders, meanwhile, are sanitizing their own atrocities with nice-sounding names like cultural revolutions. And the source argues that this made Hitler a much clearer, much easier target for that label of pure evil. Okay, now for the second pillar, his rabid anti-Semitism. The argument from the source here is not that Hitler wasn't an anti-Semite. Of course he was. The point it makes is that he didn't invent this hatred. He just tapped into a poison that had been flowing through Europe for centuries. I mean, just look at this timeline. The source shows that for centuries, literally centuries, Jewish people had been persecuted and expelled from countries all over Europe. This pattern of hate wasn't new. It was a deep, historical prejudice just waiting for someone to exploit it. And this wasn't just ancient history. The source highlights that in the 1920s, the American industrialist Henry Ford was publishing this widely read and deeply anti-Semitic newspaper series. Hitler was a known admirer. He even gave Ford a medal. It's proof that these hateful ideas were already circulating in the mainstream long before the Nazis took power. So, according to the source, this raises a really critical question. If this toxic sentiment was so widespread, why has one man's name become almost completely synonymous with it? The source's answer is that Hitler was, more than anything, a political opportunist. He didn't create the fire of anti-Semitism. He just found a centuries-old resentment smoldering in Europe and poured gasoline on it to fuel his own political ambitions. This brings us to the third and final pillar, the idea that Hitler single-handedly started World War II. And here again, the source says, that's just a huge oversimplification. The reality is the world was already a tinderbox, just waiting for a spark. From the source's perspective, the path to war started long before Hitler. You had the Treaty of Versailles, which just crushed Germany with debt and blame. That led to economic desperation. And in that kind of environment, a leader promising a return to greatness is going to find an audience. But, and this is key, Germany wasn't acting in a vacuum. The source argues the blame for the war was shared all around. Britain and France basically appeased Hitler with the Munich Agreement. The Soviet Union made a deal with him to carve up Poland, all while Japan was invading China and Italy was invading Africa. The world was awash with aggression. Hitler's was just the one that finally set Europe ablaze. So all of this, breaking down the man, the hatred, and the war, it all builds up to the source's final and most powerful point, a conclusion about who really gets to write history itself. It really just boils down to this simple, powerful idea. The one who wins the war writes the history. The victors control the narrative. And here's the source's ultimate argument. To create a story with heroic victors, the narrative needed a single concentrated villain. And after losing the war, Hitler was cast perfectly in that role. The complex, shared responsibilities of a whole world at war got flattened into a simple story of good versus evil. So, we're left to wonder, if history is really a narrative that's shaped by the winners, it forces us to ask a tough question. What other complexities, what other truths, and whose stories have been left out of the history we think we know?